Now, another powerful technique, I gave you an example earlier of how I had done some things with paragraphing and sentence length in a chapter ending. Self-Editing for Fiction Writers is one of my favorite books for style in terms of learning how to write well. And they have a whole chapter on paragraphing. And they say paragraphing frequently can add tension to the scene, whether it's because sentences tend to grow shorter as the speakers become more upset, or simply because readers' eyes move more down the page more quickly. Frequent paragraphs give snap and momentum. And that's not to say that you want to have very short paragraphs throughout the story, but you can use longer paragraphs for scenes of description or introspection where the character is pondering things, shorter paragraphs in action scenes to help them move quickly. So here's an example from what we found, a romantic mystery. And this is just the end of a chapter as say it's written all in one paragraph. My car picked up speed as it rolled down the steep hill. The light at the bottom turned yellow, so I stepped on the brakes, but the car didn't slow down. The light turned red as I pressed harder, leaning back in my seat, using my whole leg to force the brake pedal toward the floor. I sped toward the intersection while other cars entered from the sides. I sailed into the intersection, horns blaring and brakes squealing around me as I passed within inches of two cars coming from each side. That's not a bad chapter ending because it's pretty dramatic, but having all that information packed into one paragraph makes it hard to focus on the individual details. So here's one revised version. My car picked up speed as it rolled down the steep hill. The light at the bottom turned yellow. New paragraph. I stepped on the brakes. The car didn't slow down. New paragraph. The light turned red. By putting that short sentence in its own paragraph, it allows the reader to focus on it and understand what that means, that she's racing towards a light that has just turned red. I pressed harder, leaning back in my seat, using my whole leg to force the brake pedal toward the floor. Longer sentence, multiple pieces, hopefully capturing this sort of rushing feeling. My car sped toward the intersection. Other cars entered from the sides. I sailed into the intersection. Horns blared and brakes squealed around me. And then again, in a paragraph all by itself, I slid within inches of two cars coming from each side. So by breaking that up, it's almost the same words, except I cut some of the longer sentences into two and eliminated some of these connection words like but, as, while, and then I broke it up into many more paragraphs. Now, there's not a right number of paragraphs or a right number of words per sentence. It can vary. Somebody else might edit this paragraph and do it in a different way, and that's fine. And you don't want all your paragraphs to be long or all your paragraphs to be short. You want some variety. But it can be a lot of fun to play with this and see how it changes. Try really short sentences and paragraphs for a scene, and then try maybe not quite as short or a mixture.
Chris, can I ask a question from Amy Houts?
Yes.
Okay. She says, Chris, were you given detailed guidelines or an outline when you wrote your Nancy Drew novel? Is there a formula? Did you think of the dig, or did they tell you the setting?
I pitched 5 ideas to them in short paragraphs, and they liked the idea of the dig, and then I made the outline and did a sample chapter. So they did give me a Nancy Drew Bible, so all the guidelines for the series of who the characters are, how they've been updated. Nancy drives a hybrid and Bess likes to tinker with cars and so forth. So they did that kind of thing, but they didn't have guidelines really for the writing style. That was more a matter of reading the modern series and imitating it, and then feedback from the editor. So one of a novel I critiqued a few years back was the writer was a good writer, the story was good, and I couldn't figure out why things still felt a little flat. And because the writing was so good, it took me a while to recognize that every paragraph was 4 or 5 lines long. And even though things were changing with getting more dramatic scenes or action versus dialogue, having every paragraph the same length flattened things out. And my guess would be that that writer had really learned to write essays where you have sort of a typical paragraph. You have 4 or 5 sentences per paragraph. And so part of my feedback was to play with breaking it up into shorter paragraphs where you have dialogue, maybe some of these short paragraphs with action, and go ahead and leave the longer paragraphs for description, thoughts, slower moments. And so you sort of manipulate how your reader reads a story by speeding up fast scenes with lots of short paragraph, but still plenty of sensory detail, and then slowing down moments with bigger paragraphs.